Hello and welcome to MISD Assessment's video-based training on test accommodations for 2017. This video is presented by the Mansfield ISD Department of Research, Assessment, and Accountability and is designed for campus testing coordinators, also known as CTCs, in the Mansfield ISD, by which they can initiate their state-mandated training for the 2017 calendar year. This video will last approximately 20 minutes and will cover the items listed on screen. TEA has implemented some wholesale changes to accommodations this year, and this presentation will highlight the implications of those changes. We'll also focus on the supports that are typically most common on state assessments in Mansfield ISD, and we'll cover some other fundamental issues when it comes to providing accommodations to our students. To begin this presentation, it's useful to consider some historical context. In 2016 and years previous, students could take several versions of STAR, including paper or online with additional accommodations, standardized oral administration, which was available online only for select subjects and grades, STAR A and/or STAR L, which were available online only and included accommodations embedded in the student interface, or STAR Alternate 2, which the student took on paper, after which the CTC entered the data online through a tedious process using Pearson Access Next. In 2017, students may still take STAR paper or online with what are now called designated supports. The online edition of STAR may also include any or all of the supports previously embedded by default in STAR A and STAR L. STAR Alternate 2 retains the same approach, but TEA and Pearson promise an easier process for entering student data online. Overall, the 2017 edition of STAR for students receiving accommodations is definitely streamlined, although it may still seem confusing at first. Our intent throughout this video, among other things, will be to alleviate that confusion. This frame shows TEA's main page for accessing information related to accommodations. What you'll notice immediately is that although the page is still titled Accommodation Resources, TEA has altered the subheading to 2017 Accessibility, with accessibility features and designated supports indicated underneath. TEA is moving away from the old paradigm in which accommodations were primarily reserved for students receiving special ed, 504, and ELL services, toward a more open approach for students needing additional support on state assessments. Under this approach, an accommodation is viewed mainly as a classroom-based adjustment. As such, some accommodations may be allowed as accessibility features on STAR, while others may be designated supports with more specific eligibility requirements. And some designated supports require TEA approval through the accommodation request process. You'll find all the details of these features and supports at the URL listed on screen here. With this new approach comes a shift in terminology outlined by this table. The most notable changes are the shift from accommodations to designated supports, as well as the retirement of the accommodation triangle and its Type 1 and Type 2 headings. Also, linguistic accommodations have, if you'll pardon the pun, exited the program and are no longer confined to separate documentation. Instead, ELL status is now part of the eligibility criteria for specific designated supports. Regardless of terminology, TEA still emphasizes overarching principles regarding accommodations on STAR. As always, accommodations should be routine, effective, and independent. In other words, students should use the accommodations regularly and on their own, and there should be evidence that doing so improves learning and academic performance for the student. For purposes of STAR, TEA stipulates that no device used for accommodations may have internet access or photographic capability. And the agency issues the disclaimer that not every daily classroom accommodation will be allowable on state assessments. The determination of eligibility for designated supports is handled essentially the same way it's been done in the past, although the list has expanded over the years. Most people are familiar with the decision-making authority of ARD committees, 504 committees, and LPACs, but RTI teams now have some authority when it comes to designated supports on STAR. Other groups, as determined by campus principal, typically address emergency supports, such as when a student breaks an arm and needs basic transcribing. Now let's look at the actual supports themselves. Although TEA now uses the term supports instead of accommodations, the title applied to each support for the most part remains the same. Rather than presenting an alphabetical list, this frame categorizes supports based on the determination of eligibility, and it may require a longer look to understand everything. To the upper left, you see the supports that are available to students who receive special ed or 504 services or who have an RTI plan. 3 of those supports require additional circumstances, and 2 of those 3 may also be available to ELL students. To the lower left are supports available to special ed, 504, or ELL students. The 2 supports at the bottom center are available only to special ed or 504 students. To the upper right are the 3 embedded supports available only in the online version of STAR to special ed, 504, and ELL students. And to the lower right are the 5 supports that require TEA approval, all of which have their own specific eligibility requirements. TEA's website includes a link to documentation related to each support, such as the one appearing on screen. Each document includes the 6 subheadings listed on the left side of the frame. When examining these documents, it's important to look at examples, particularly on math manipulatives, calculation aids, supplemental aids, dictionaries, and spelling assistance, for all of which TEA has stipulated that only the items described on the document may be used. TEA has also posted guidelines for 2 of the designated supports that are available only in the online version of STAR. These guidelines describe the specific method used to deliver the support to the student through the online interface. Guidelines are posted for content supports and language and vocabulary supports. However, text-to-speech has no guidelines document because it is listed under oral administration, not as its own separate designated support. Now we turn our attention to some designated supports that tend to be used more commonly in Mansfield ISD. The first of these is transcribing, which consists of 2 types: basic transcribing, which is simply a local decision, and complex transcribing, which requires TEA approval. This frame outlines the examples from the document for each support. As in years past, the only tests on which complex transcribing could be delivered are grade 4 and 7 writing and English 1 and 2 EOC, and transcribing is only considered complex if the student dictates his or her composition directly to a staff member. Remember, complex transcribing also requires the student to dictate capitalization and punctuation. All other transcribing is considered basic. In most cases in MISD, students use basic transcribing, including word processing software where the computer has had spell check, autocomplete, and internet connectivity disabled. If your campus has any students receiving basic transcribing, be sure to check the basic transcribing document, Special Instructions, item 8 on page 3, for the specific verbiage to include on the answer document. Next, we consider oral administration, for which TEA has made a significant adjustment. This frame outlines those items that may and may not be read to the student based on the assessments section of the TEA document. Keep in mind, oral administration is still allowed in its traditional form, where an adult reads all or part of the allowable items to the student. It can also be delivered online using the text-to-speech option. If a given student receives oral administration according to the IEP, 504 plan, ELL plan, or RTI plan, support can be delivered through the traditional or text-to-speech method. It is not necessary to document the specific method in the student's plan, although it is allowable. When determining which option to use, campuses should consider the implications on grade 4 and 7 writing and on English EOCs, because text-to-speech allows reading of more content than does traditional oral administration. But that flexibility should be weighed against the pros and cons of the online versus paper format. The relevant decision-making group should focus on the best interest of the student. For any test administrator who will deliver oral administration of STAR, he or she must be aware of the additional responsibilities involved. These include agreeing and adhering to TEA's requirements regarding confidentiality of secure content on the test administrator oath, and familiarity with the STAR Oral Administration Guidelines, which are now housed in a separate book from the test administrator manual. Next, we look at supplemental aids, whose usage in the classroom appears to have risen in recent years. TEA has released a presentation that provides more thorough guidance on allowable supplemental aids, and this frame shows two examples from that presentation, a mnemonic device and a fractions chart. Both examples shown here illustrate the main characteristic of allowable supplemental aids. They should include nothing explicit related to the academic content. TEA's philosophy is that there is a line between support and advantage, and labels, keywords, highlighting, etc. cross that line. Please note that as of 2017, addition and multiplication charts are no longer listed as allowable supplemental aids. Why is that the case? Glad you asked. In 2016, the accommodation was called Calculation Devices and focused on calculators. In 2017, TEA has changed the name to Calculation Aids and categorized addition and multiplication charts under this designated support. The rationale for the change is mainly to discourage the use of these charts in grades 3 and 4 because the skills addressed by those charts are embedded in the mathematics TEKS for those grades. Here again, TEA intends to draw the line between support and advantage, this time based on grade-level student expectations. Now we consider the 3 designated supports that are available only through the online version of STAR. For details on each support, consult the relevant TEA accommodation document. This frame is designed mainly to provide context relative to 2016, when students could take STAR with Standardized Oral Administration, STAR L, or STAR A. The support delivered through Standardized Oral Administration is now available through text-to-speech under Oral Administration. It's worth noting that Standardized Oral Administration was limited to certain subjects and grades, while text-to-speech is available in English for all STAR subjects and grades. STAR L included text-to-speech and language and vocabulary supports, and STAR A added content supports to the mix. In 2017, the main task for the appropriate decision-making group is to assign one or more of these supports, as always, in the student's best interest. As noted earlier, TEA has renamed Type 2 accommodations to Designated Supports Requiring TEA Approval. Beyond the name change, nothing has really changed with regard to these supports. Our office will provide a district-level approval request form for campuses to submit. That form includes information that will not go to TEA but will be used locally for tracking purposes. We will then submit TEA's approval request form with only the information required. Remember, approval of these requests is not guaranteed, although our office can make recommendations that increase the chances of TEA approval. Also, keep in mind that these supports carry additional guidelines from TEA, so anyone involved in delivering a designated support requiring TEA approval must be informed of those guidelines and follow them. Speaking of guidelines, Mansfield ISD will maintain its district-level accommodation time guidelines for 2017. If an accommodation is removed from a student's IEP or other plan, that change can be implemented immediately on state assessments because there's no need to establish removal is routine and effective. However, MISD stipulates that any new accommodations added to an IEP or other plan require 4 weeks to meet the routine and effective guideline issued by TEA. Therefore, any change that adds an accommodation may be implemented on state assessments 4 weeks after the decision. The accommodation can be used in the classroom immediately, but if an administration of STAR occurs within that 4-week window, the new accommodation will not apply to the STAR administration. Typically, this district rule has the greatest effect on the first round of STAR, but the appropriate dates for all spring administrations of STAR are shown on this frame. Next, we address what used to be called allowable test procedures, now renamed to accessibility features. These features are available to any student without the need for any special population status or any eligibility approval. The most notable addition to this list is at the upper left. bilingual dictionary on math, science, and social studies tests, which was previously considered a linguistic accommodation. It's also worth noting that reading assistance on Grade 3 math is still available to all students, provided the assistance is minimal and requested by the student. As always, our office recommends offering accessibility features on a case-by-case basis, as opposed to advertising their availability as a matter of course. It's important to consider the potential logistical concerns created by having numerous parents requesting certain accessibility features. For instance, some campuses could end up with more requests for individual administration than adults in the building, so be judicious when offering accessibility features on STAR. This frame addresses 3 items that may provoke questions by now. First, if you're still wondering where linguistic accommodations went, fear not. They're still available. They're just not listed on a separate document. Instead, you'll find ELL students addressed on the relevant documents for designated supports and accessibility features. Second, for Grade 4 students taking the online version of STAR who may be slow on a keyboard, TEA still allows campuses to collect handwritten compositions and type those exactly as written into the ETS Secure browser using the information on the student's test ticket. This provision for Grade 4 writing is not considered a designated support and does not need to be documented as an accommodation. Lastly, emergency accommodations, such as basic transcribing for a student with an injury, are still available as needed. In such situations, feel free to contact our office for guidance. Rounding out this video is a brief description of the codes used to document accommodations on STAR answer documents. This process has been simplified even more in 2017, as shown by this image taken directly from the District and Campus Coordinator Manual. Only 3 possible codes, 2 of which refer to specific supports, are available. Any designated support approved for a student that is not large print or extra day is documented simply as a general accommodation, GA. The appropriate bubble should be marked even if the student did not use the specific support. For online tests, the online-only supports are documented automatically based on the student's registration. If the student is approved for an additional support, such as extra time, that support must be documented using the ETS online system. We'll provide instructions on how to enter this information at a later time. Why do we provide those instructions? Because the job of MISD assessment is to provide guidance and support to you, so feel free to contact us if you have questions. We also encourage you to make use of our informational resources on the web, including our website and YouTube channel, or you can follow us on Twitter at MISD Assessment. We always do our best to provide the most up-to-date information available regarding STAR testing. Thanks for watching.